Once upon a time, God held a competition to choose animals that would serve him. Each animal reached the finish line in its own way and took its place. 12 of them were chosen as divine spirits who would stand beside God and watch over the world. One animal also dreamed of becoming a spirit, but did not reach the finish line in time for an unfair reason. 1,000 years passed, and the cat decided to restore justice. This animal, which had managed to transform itself, entered the competition of the gods again. The race began, and we are about to witness a historic event. The next scene took place on the roof of a tall building. A guy with glasses covered his face with his hand and begged a stranger standing with her back to him to wait. His face looked frightened, and the young man promised that he could explain everything. He took a barely noticeable step toward the girl. "Now, your body. I'm not sure what happened." The guy tried to talk to the unfortunate beauty. He and the girl standing next to him quickly glanced at each other. "Will I ever be able to return to my previous state?" asked the beauty standing with her back to them. At that moment, both friends jumped up and ran forward at full speed. The girl jumped high. Her baseball cap flew off her head, revealing cat ears. The beauty with long blonde hair sensed people approaching and looked back. The guy reached out his hand, trying to grab her clothes. But his fingers caught only emptiness, and the girl leaned forward. The young man with glasses and his tailed friend raised their impressed faces to the sky. The stranger with long hair jumped easily and found herself high in the air. Her light figure was visible against the backdrop of the full moon. A drop of sweat appeared on the face of the young man with glasses. He stared silently at the dark sky for a few more minutes. The young man looked confused, still unable to believe his eyes. Now he could clearly see that the stranger had large rabbit ears and a small, fluffy tail. Like a bird, she rose higher and higher into the sky. The beauty herself did not understand how she had ended up in such a situation. She was a rabbit who had come in fourth place. Meanwhile, somewhere else, a lonely figure stood in an alley, lighting a cigarette. A small flame illuminated the girl's hand, covered with bandages. It was number 11 of the Zodiac signs, namely, the dog. She took a drag and looked thoughtfully at the starry sky. Zodiac number 8, the sheep, was a smart girl with glasses who was more interested in books than in real people. The cheerful red-haired beauty took 9th place. She was actually a monkey. 13 years ago, a cat won 13th place for herself. The one in the baseball cap forced the frightened, bespectacled girl to listen to her. She decided to use force on him and grab the guy by the arms. "This time, no matter what happens, I will definitely win," the cat said, with confidence in her voice. Then the bespectacled boy realized that he would have to be the judge of this competition. The large school stadium was still empty. The morning had just begun. The young man with glasses was named Lee Uju. He was immersed in a new comic book. The hero thought once again how much he hated school. The boy was physically weak and not particularly brave. That's why it was difficult for him to make friends with other kids. Not to mention starting to date someone. Reading his comics, Lee Woo-ju dreamed, "If only people were as innocent as animals." Suddenly, bare legs appeared above the surprised young man's head. The next moment, a dark figure with cat-like ears leaned over him. She uttered only one word. "Found you!" The young man was stunned by the appearance of the strange stranger. The cat girl quickly jumped to the floor, completely naked. Lee Uju's face flushed with embarrassment. The beauty with cat ears looked back, her eyes large and yellow. When she got to her feet, the young man covered his face with the magazine he had just been reading out of embarrassment. The strange girl brought her face close to the hero and said that it was somehow strange. The beauty looked closely at the guy's face, trying to figure out if she was imagining things. After getting kicked in the rear, the young man flew out of the room and fell to the floor. A girl was standing in the doorway. She said, "I finally found you." The beautiful girl with long hair smiled at the guy. Lee muttered, "No, there was just some girl here." The old acquaintance put her hand to her eyes as if trying to see someone. Then she said that there was no one there. The guy looked shocked that the stranger had disappeared somewhere. There really wasn't a soul around. "Now you're lying too? Liars must be punished, right?" said the blonde, grabbing the young man by the cheeks. The hero tried to convince the girl that someone was really there. But it was useless, and they began to mock him again. Someone's foot in a sock approached the unfortunate boy's face. The young man was kneeling on the floor, surrounded by a crowd of mocking teenagers, while the blonde girl forced him to smell her feet. "What's wrong with your face?" "This is a reward, not a punishment," the beauty said in a serious tone. The guy managed to squeeze out, "Yes, exactly. The scent seems pleasant." After Lee's words, the scumbags laughed, greatly amused by the humiliation of others. The girl had no intention of stopping. She began to pull off her sock. She handed it to the hero and offered to give it to him as a gift. The teenagers around them decided that the unfortunate guy was enjoying this mockery. They found it disgusting. Are you ashamed? Our Uju is as small as a girl, right? What an idiot. Ha ha ha. Does he even know how a man should behave? The teenagers continued to vote. They wouldn't let up. Oh, by the way, he has a wife, Beck Rabin. I heard they live together. The hero objected, saying that this was not the case because the girl lived on the floor below. The girl who had been teasing the young man the most exclaimed, "Do you really live with Beck Rabin?" Lee Uju was still red as a lobster and looked at his classmates warily through his glasses. The teenagers looked at the girl sitting alone in the empty classroom. The beauty was upset about something and paid no attention to the stares of others. Lee continued to deny it, trying to explain that he just lived with Beck Rabin. But the nasty blonde wouldn't let up. Have you already been doing all sorts of dirty things together? The girl sitting in the classroom slowly rose from her chair. She walked over to where Uju was kneeling, surrounded by trash. It was Beck Rabin. She boldly said, "Yes, we live together." The beauty couldn't understand why they cared about that. The blonde girl smiled and said that it was ridiculous. "Hey, Duhiji, you better live your own life and don't stick your nose into other people's business," Rabin said threateningly. "And stop smiling so disgustingly and mocking the weak," added the brave beauty, looking encouragingly at Lee Woo-jae. Doo-hee was stunned that this fragile blonde could stand up to her. Beck walked past her with a firm step, pushing her shoulder painfully. The girl approached the hero, grabbed his hand, lifted him off his knees, and pulled him along, throwing over her shoulder. "What are you standing there for, Lee Woo-ju? Let's go!" Rabbi didn't stop, and the two friends quickly left the classroom. It all happened so quickly that the stunned teenagers didn't have time to react. Classes were still in session, so the schoolyard was still empty. Beck Rabin dragged her friend into some kind of storage room. The young man blushed again and sincerely thanked his friend for her help. The beauty touched his face and advised him not to make up anything unnecessary. She explained her words. "I just don't like looking like an idiot because of you." Lee Uju could only manage to apologize. This bold girl, Beck Rabin, was his childhood friend. She said angrily, "You're a guy. Why are you acting like a wimp?" Childhood was over, and now these two were in different school castes. She was a popular girl, and he was a nerd. The beauty asked the guy to find the strength within himself and not allow himself to be insulted. The friends didn't notice that two interested cat eyes were watching them. Beck continued to talk when suddenly, out of the corner of her eye, the girl saw something flying at her from the window. The next moment, a black cat jumped right onto the beauty's face. Lee Uju ran to help his friend, who couldn't see anything and was starting to lose her balance. Beck Rabin couldn't stay on her feet and fell to the floor. The hero fell, so the girl fell on top of him and didn't hit the floor. She held her head, trying to understand what had happened. Could it be that some crazy cat had clawed her face? A string with some kind of strange pendant fell out of the girl's blouse. This pendant caught the guy's attention. It seemed to hypnotize him. Memories of the day when this pendant appeared in Lee Uju's life came to the hero's mind. "Really? Can I really take it? But your mom gave it to you," little Beck Rabin had said a long time ago. The young man replied with a smile, "Yes, because you are as dear to me as my mother." The hero's pensive thoughts were interrupted by the dissatisfied voice of the now adult Beck. "What are you thinking about?" The next moment, the boy saw his friend right above his face. She looked a little confused. When their eyes met, both young people blushed. At that moment, the cat reappeared out of nowhere and headed toward them. The black thief flew between the friends like lightning, but she managed to grab the girl's medallion. The string on which the pendant hung could not withstand the pull and broke. The black cat, holding its prey in its teeth, was on the windowsill in a matter of seconds. At the last moment, she looked back and gave the robbed couple a sly look. Beck Rabin screamed, upset that her favorite pendant had been stolen. The girl asked the cat to give back something so precious to her, but it did not respond. The hero still looked stunned by the fact that his girlfriend was still wearing a gift from her childhood. The beauty was upset about the loss of her favorite piece of jewelry. The young man kept his confused eyes on Beck Rabin. He tried to quickly figure out what to do. The hero quickly made a decision and looked decisively at the window where the thief had been sitting just a moment ago. The guy quickly climbed out the window and chased after the black cat. The young man ran as fast as he could, and it seemed that he was about to catch up with the fluffy creature. Running down the street, the two ended up in the chemistry lab. Without stopping, they quickly reached the hallway. The girl who had recently mocked the boy heard a shout, "Everyone out of the way!" Looking back, Do-hee saw a black cat running straight at her, followed by the object of her mockery. The thief looked pleased, and looking at her one could conclude that they were playing a fun game. The hero, without stopping, almost knocked his classmate off her feet. Without looking back, he apologized to her. This girl was not one to allow herself to be ignored. The scoundrel took off her slipper, and now she was going to show him. Swinging her arm, the girl threw it accurately right at the hero's back. It seemed that the slipper would hit its target, but it would hurt the young man between his shoulder blades. Lee Uju sensed danger, turned sharply, and saw the shoe flying towards him. The guy dodged in time, and Do-heeja's slipper hit the cat right on the head. The girl looked confused because she was aiming at Lee and had no intention of hitting the cat. The blow was so powerful that the thief, who was still holding the pendant in her teeth, was thrown out of the open window. The hero reached out his hand, hoping to catch the furry thief. The guy wasn't going to give up and jumped out the window after the cat. Beck Rabin was standing on the street and saw her friend begin to fall to the ground. She couldn't believe her eyes. This hero with a cat in his arms was nothing like the insecure Lee Woo-ju. The thought flashed through the guy's mind. Am I really going to die like this? He felt sorry for the hero because there was so much he hadn't tried yet. Suddenly, Lee heard a voice very close by. What are you doing, you fool? I'm a cat and I'll be fine. But if you fall from such a height, you'll definitely die, said the necklace thief. The young man, a former animal, speaks. Well, really, I tried to choose carefully. If this man jumps out of the window to save a cat, then my choice is right, as if the cat said to herself. The next moment, she exclaimed, Jade, I summon you. Heavenly Throne, determine your master in the competition of the 12 signs of the Zodiac. Everything around turned green. The cat looked at the stolen pendant and repeated her cry. It seemed that the animal wanted Lee Uju to be the judge of this competition. The thought flashed through the hero's mind. A competition between the 12 signs of the Zodiac? A judge? What does that mean? The pendant began to glow even brighter, its light illuminating the entire street. A magical sign appeared in the place where Lee was about to fall. Suddenly, the cat cried out, Hurry up and say you agree to be the judge. The young man watched fearfully as the asphalt rapidly approached him. I'll be a judge, the hero finally exclaimed and closed his eyes in fear, waiting for the terrible blow. Wonderful. Now we just need the rules, he heard the cat's voice. Suddenly, as if in a dream, the young man saw an incredibly beautiful woman in luxurious clothes. She asked, What do you desire? The hero was stunned. It seemed to him that this was happening in a dream. The mysterious beauty repeated, Think carefully. What do you really want? The stranger did not take her eyes off the confused young man. Her face was reflected in the glass of Lee Uju's glasses. The hero closed his eyes and thought deeply, trying to understand what he really wanted. When he opened his eyes again, he saw the usual style above him. A confused woman was leaning over the young man. Her face looked worried. Lee screamed loudly, for some reason terribly frightened. He sat up abruptly in bed and accidentally hit the woman right in the forehead with his head. The dark-haired girl exclaimed, You're finally coming to! Is your head okay? Then she explained that the young man had fallen from the 4th floor. Lee Uju glanced around the hospital room. He couldn't remember anything. It's unbelievable, but there are no external injuries. You probably have memory problems due to severe shock, the beautiful woman suggested. The hero didn't know what to say. It was difficult for him to collect his thoughts. The doctor warned that there could be complications and advised the hero to go to the hospital. The young man got up and left. His head was spinning a little. The girl with glasses saw the strange young man walk by. Classes were over, and the hero headed home. He caught himself thinking that his head was indeed spinning a little. Upon entering the apartment, the young man decided to quickly wash up and go to bed. Opening the door to his room, the guy screamed. A black cat was lying on his bed. You're that thieving cat, Lee shouted, pointing at it. The animal replied, What thief? That pendant actually belongs to me. The young man thought deeply. Had he believed a stranger right away? But he was even more struck by the fact that the cat could talk. Turning abruptly, wanting to run out of the room, the hero hit his head on the lintel. The cat stretched and said, Now you're the judge, don't make me regret choosing you. Having recovered a little from the initial shock, Lee asked again what judge she was talking about. The cat's eyes lit up with a yellow fire. She hissed, Don't you remember? Are you going to keep pretending? The next moment, she jumped right at the hero, intending to make him remember everything. At that moment, Beck Rabin returned home. She stopped and looked at the hero's windows. I hope Uju is okay. He should be home by now, the girl thought. Before she could even step onto the stairs, she heard a terrible scream coming from the apartment. The beauty ran forward, deciding that something had happened to her childhood friend. She ran up the stairs, averting her gaze, afraid to see the worst. When she reached the young man's apartment door, she stopped to catch her breath and listened. After a few seconds, Beck Rabin grabbed the doorknob and shouted that she was coming in. The next moment she was inside and everything looked normal. Running into the hero's room, the beauty exclaimed, "What happened?" What Beck saw made her freeze in her tracks. Her friend was with a completely naked girl with cat ears. She froze with her eyes and mouth wide open, unable to utter a word. Lee Uju looked at his girlfriend, his face looking confused. The cat girl looked at Rabin with interest and meowed softly. The next second, a loud scream rang out, audible even on the street. Beck Rabin was the first to scream. It was very loud. Next, Lee Uju couldn't hold back. The young man's face flushed. But the cat in the form of a girl did not scream, but looked closely at the two people. The next moment she asked, "Do you remember now?" Beck ran out of the room, shouting loudly, "Mom, Lee Uju has a naked girl!" The hero tried to stop his friend, but he failed. The young man finally came to his senses and asked the uninvited guest who she was. The girl replied with a smile, "I'm a cat. We saw each other this morning and fell out of the window together." The cat asked to be called Nina and suggested that they become friends. Lee asked his new acquaintance to put something on. Suddenly, the young man heard more screams and looked back in fear. He heard the voice of his childhood friend, who was still calling for her mother. Uju spread his arms wide and screamed himself. It was a scream of shame, not horror. Beck Rabin returned to the hero's room and pointed at him, repeating what she had shouted a few minutes earlier. The boy sank to the floor and fell silent, only blinking his eyes. The girl's mother, who had followed her, said with a smile, "Come on, aren't you awake yet? It's late." The young man greeted his aunt and she nodded in response. The woman did not see a single naked girl in the room, but her daughter was sure that she could believe her own eyes. In fact, Nina had managed to transform back into a cat and hide behind the young man's back. The girl's mother said to Lee, "I'm leaving. If you want to have dinner together, come downstairs." Beck ran after her mother, begging her to wait. At that moment, the cat turned back into a girl. The hero caught his breath. She touched his shoulders, and the young man almost turned gray with horror. He was not yet used to these transformations. At that moment, the hero's friend returned to the room. Uju made a move as if trying to hide someone, but Nina managed to turn back into a black cat. As soon as Beck Rabin turned away, the cat turned back into a girl. As soon as his friend disappeared, Lee shouted, covering his eyes with his hand, "Enough! Can't you at least stay in the cat's body for a little while longer?" The hero lifted the pillows and invited his new acquaintance to sit there. The black cat looked unhappy but did not argue. She curled up into a ball and quickly fell asleep. Lee watched her suspiciously for a while longer. The young man sank helplessly onto the bed, trying to understand what was happening to him today. Nina said, as if reading his thoughts, "Something must have happened when you fell. How awful." The boy lay down on the bed and said as he fell asleep, "The signs of the Zodiac? You mean those old legends?" The cat replied, "Folk legends? Ancient legends? That was indeed a long time ago. The first competition in 3,000 years awaits us." As he fell into a deep sleep, the young man couldn't understand why he wanted to sleep so badly. He heard the cat say, "Today, I had no choice but to choose you." Even in his sleep, the hero heard that his acquaintance had named him the judge. He thought it was nonsense. Under a large spreading tree sat a figure surrounded by various animals. The man touched the lamb with his hand and said, "It's time for me to go." There was also a black cat there, looking confused and upset. The man stood up and asked the animals who wanted to go with him. The cat ran up to the figure and put its paws on the man's robe. As he left, he said, "Unfortunately, not everyone will be able to take a seat next to me. There were only 12 places next to God, and you've probably guessed that it was him." He added that he wanted to decide everything during the competition. It would be fair. The hero began to wake up, remembering his dream about the cat. The next moment, the guy sat up sharply in bed, trying to collect his thoughts after the dream. Lee looked at the place where the cat had been sleeping and, not seeing it, assumed it was just a dream. The young man was stunned and a little embarrassed. He began to recall the events of the past day. The image of his classmate Do-hee and her bullying of him came to mind. The hero remembered how he sat on his knees in the school hallway and smelled her dirty socks. After these memories, Lee finally realized how much he didn't want to go to school. With an incredible effort of will, the young man forced himself to get out of bed. He walked over to the clothes rack and began to put on his shirt. The hero did not yet see that two yellow eyes were watching him closely. Nina appeared on the windowsill. Lee tied his tie, put on his vest and a fresh jacket. It was his school uniform. This time, the cat did not show itself to the hero. It silently jumped from the windowsill to the ground. As soon as she touched the asphalt, Nina took on human form. She took a few steps toward another window. Without permission to enter, Nina found herself in a room on the first floor. A soft toy bear was sitting next to the window. She went straight to someone else's closet, examined its contents, and began to choose clothes for herself. It was Beck Rabin's room. The black cat in human form enthusiastically rummaged through her friend Lee's closet. When he reached his classroom, the young man put his head in his hands and thought, "Thank God DeHedge didn't come to school today. They won't make fun of me." When he got to his class, the young man put his head in his hands and thought, "Thank God DeHedge didn't come to school today. They won't make fun of me." Suddenly, the boy overheard two school children talking. It caught his attention. "By the way, Beck Rabin isn't at school today. Could it be because of what happened yesterday?" Lee Uju was stunned by what he heard. Could something have happened to his friend? A picture of yesterday's events appeared in his mind when Beck stood up for him and pushed Du with her shoulder. Yesterday, his childhood friend had put an end to his suffering by protecting him from ridicule. The others continued to gossip. "Beck Rabin, I feel so sorry for her. How did she end up with that loser?" The hero couldn't bear to hear it anymore. He ran out of the classroom as fast as he could. Already at the door, he paused for a moment and looked back. The young man couldn't believe it. Was it really because of him? Lee Uju ran home very quickly, his girlfriend never leaving his thoughts. The hero's heart was pounding as he ran to Beck Rabin's door. When the door opened, the boy asked in a trembling voice if Rabin was home. From deep inside the apartment, he heard, "She went to school. I think you were together." What he heard frightened Lee. His girlfriend wasn't answering her phone or messages, and she hadn't shown up at school. The young man ran around the neighborhood. Everything was empty. The hero was in despair. He stopped to catch his breath when suddenly Nina appeared on the street in human form, eating ice cream. She hid her cat ears under a cap and would have looked like an ordinary girl if it weren't for her cattail. "What? Are you the cat girl from yesterday, Nina?" The guy couldn't believe his eyes. He had already convinced himself that it was just a dream. He asked the cat what the hell was going on. She reminded him that she had already explained everything yesterday. "Wait, are you really walking around like that? Everyone will realize you're a cat." Nina replied that she had put on a cap to hide her ears. The hero exclaimed that she had forgotten about her tail, but that didn't matter now. Right now, the young man was more concerned about the fact that he couldn't find Beck Rabin. The cat threw her ice cream stick on the asphalt and replied casually that everything had already begun. Lee grabbed her by the shoulders, wanting to understand what she was talking about as quickly as possible. Nina smiled predatorily, her eyes burning with yellow fire. The arrival of the signs of the Zodiac has begun. The hero heard a sound like an explosion behind him, and a golden pillar of light rose into the sky. The guy decided to look back and, stammering, asked what it was. Nina grabbed his hand, quickly saying that it was time to go, and pulled him somewhere. "Listen carefully. The ceremony has already begun," the cat in human form quickly explained. "It means that the 12 gods are coming down to the world to hold their competition," Nina explained as she ran down the street. She added, "I think one has already come to this world and taken possession of that girl." The young man asked again, "That girl? Do you mean Rabin? Wait, why her?" The cat in human form did not have time to explain everything to the hero. He asked again what would happen now and received this answer. "First, as the judge, you must invite all 12 gods to the game." Lee Uju was stunned by this news. He was sure he couldn't do it. Nina replied angrily, "If you fail, your friend will simply be fed to the gods." The hero almost fainted when he heard this. He was very worried about Beck Rabin. The cat advised the guy not to delay, as a lot depended on him now. The two of them had just reached the building, from whose roof a pillar of light was rising. There was a sign on the door with the following information: "Attention, be sure to close after use." Lee was the first to go inside, and he shouted loudly, "Rabbi, are you here?" Suddenly, the hero saw something that made him freeze. The guy's eyes behind his glasses rolled back into his head. In the dark corner of the storage room, hiding her face in her knees, sat Beck. The young man took a step forward when suddenly he heard his girlfriend's voice asking him not to come any closer. The hero had more questions than answers. What happened? Why? Rabbi shouted, "I said don't come closer!" She wasn't going to explain anything. Suddenly, some incredibly strong magical energy forced Lee to stop. Beck jumped up and rushed past her friend like a hurricane. Nina said they had to run after her before she became completely possessed. So, chasing after the girl, they reached the roof of the building. Lee Uju turned to his friend. Rabbi, now we need to hold some kind of zodiac competition. If you take part, your body will return to its previous state later. You will become yourself again. The girl did not answer, and the hero looked at Nina, waiting for her advice. When the two rushed forward, the girl suddenly flew into the air. She jumped very high, which looked incredible against the backdrop of the moonlit sky. This means that he became the first enemy. Fourth place among the zodiac signs, said Nina. The hero managed to see that his friend had grown long ears, and she was jumping with ease. The rabbit god had possessed her. Lee Uju was puzzled for the umpteenth time in 2 days. He found it hard to believe what he was seeing. The young man looked at Beck's face. She was stunned by her new abilities. The girl flew through the night sky like a bird. She paid no attention to her childhood friend. The boy tried to shout to her, but it was useless. The beauty with huge ears and a small tail began to descend. She flew very close, but again did not respond to the hero's call. The young man watched with sadness in his eyes as his best friend changed and completely ignored him. Lee Uju watched apprehensively as the girl descended, afraid that she would crash. Nina suddenly said, "For some reason this annoys me. Why did a rabbit possess me?" The hero's hands trembled and he decided that his friend had fallen. The cat put her hand on his. She said, "What are you muttering to yourself about? She doesn't have any time." The guy looked back, tears streaming down his face. "What? I'm saying a person just fell from here." He didn't understand how Nina could be so heartless. She exclaimed, "We'll miss everything," and pulled the hero away. The cat pulled Lee Wooju right into the abyss. Nina was having a lot of fun, but the guy was on the verge of losing consciousness again. Floor after floor, they flew down, the ground rapidly approaching. The cat saw the guy's condition, smiled, and advised him not to be nervous. She held the young man's hand and felt it trembling. The hero opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He was very scared. The air currents swirled around the two people as if they were light feathers. Thanks to the cat's skill, they managed to land on their feet. "Well, admit it, isn't it incredible? I shared my power with you. A cat always lands on its feet," Nina exclaimed with a smile. The hero almost threw up. When the young man finally managed to control his emotions, he heard a suspicious sound behind him and looked back. From above, as if out of nowhere, Beck Raven flew toward him with rabbit ears. Her huge ears fluttered in the wind like wings. The girl landed on her knees with her back to Lee. It was impossible to see her face now. The hero couldn't believe his eyes as he silently stared at his childhood friend. The girl did not react to anything. Nina exclaimed, "We have to stop her before she becomes completely possessed." The cat scratched the back of her head and admitted that she hadn't exercised in a long time. After these words, she rushed forward, her eyes burning with a wildfire. But Nina's sudden attack failed. Beck managed to jump up and thus avoided the attack. She managed to look into the possessed cat's eyes, which were empty. The cat attacked again and again, but the rabbit was faster. Lee watched, holding his breath. He had never seen anything like it before. The cat tried to catch up with the rabbit, but she was faster. Beck Raven jumped in the air, getting further and further away each time. She jumped onto a lamppost and looked at her pursuer. The girl didn't look like herself, her eyes hidden under long bangs. One of the beauty's eyes was red, while the other was normal, and a tear was running down her face. Beck said in a trembling voice, "Someone, stop!" Lee asked in a sad tone as if to himself. "Is she crying?" The hero exclaimed, turning to his friend. "Raven, why are you running away? To get you back, you have to take part in the competition." Nina said, "What the hell? The obsession is spreading faster than I thought. Plus, that relief on the rabbit's hand." The guy didn't understand why she remembered the rabbit. The cat explained irritably, "Didn't you hear me? Those huge ears and jumps are her abilities, just as expected of a herbivore. She jumps like she's on springs." A thought flashed through Nina's mind. If this continues, she'll become completely obsessed. The hero couldn't quickly accept the fact that his girlfriend had become a herbivore. If Nina's cat landing worked, they have animal instincts, Lee concluded, clenching his fist. The young man rushed over to the cat, wanting to say something to her. He politely asked if she could listen to him for a minute. Nina looked at Lee Uju in surprise, silently. Beck Raven jumped off the lamppost and hopped forward. She headed away as if she was going to run away again. The cat jumped up and ran forward. She wanted to catch the rabbit at all costs. Sharp claws appeared on Nina's hands. She tried to reach for the rabbit, but Beck was still faster. Rabbi clung to the wall and looked down with her empty eyes. It was no longer the gaze of Lee's friend. It was the burning eyes of God. The rabbit ran along the wall of the house, ignoring the earth's gravity. The cat also jumped onto the wall, preparing to continue the chase. Beck Rabin was driven forward by what was hidden inside her. The girl's eyes glowed with a mystical fire as she raised her head and looked up somewhere. She jumped again and easily leaped onto the building. The cat, which had been watching the possessed girl closely, smiled at its thoughts. Meanwhile, Lee ran up the stairs and thought, if predators are sprinters, then herbivores are natural marathon runners. Predators like you can't catch herbivores in open terrain, the hero thought. He advised Nina to set up an ambush, as that was the only way they could catch the rabbit. As he continued running up the stairs, the young man suddenly stumbled. The hero lost his balance and fell forward. Falling onto the tiled floor, he hit his head hard and lost consciousness. A little later, he came to, remembering that he had to lure his childhood friend onto the roof. He remembered Beck's face, the tear running down her cheek. The young man couldn't see well without his glasses, so he made an effort to put them back on his nose. Reaching out, Lee Uju grabbed the frame of his glasses. The hero got to his feet and, holding onto the wall, moved forward with unsteady steps. A little later, the boy finally reached the roof of the building. Lee was breathing heavily, his eyes barely focused. The young man was breathing heavily. But it was all worth it. He made it in time. Beck was just jumping onto the roof. The guy was glad that their plan had worked. He ran forward thinking, I'll be where she lands and catch her. Beck was falling right into the hero's arms. Just a moment more, and he would catch her. The guy was so tense that his face was sweating. The girl began to fall forward, right into her friend's arms. Under the weight of her body, the hero's shoes sank into the asphalt. It was very difficult for the young man to hold the beauty, but he gritted his teeth and endured. Suddenly, a powerful beam of energy shot up from the girl's eyes toward the sky. Beck Rabin looked completely crazy. She's not herself. There's no other way. We have to force her into the competition. Hold on, exclaimed Nina, who had just appeared on the roof. Lee was struggling to hold the possessed girl in his arms. The young man was sure that no matter how difficult it was for him, he would never let her go. Since childhood, this girl had always been the first to lend him a helping hand. The unfortunate girl began to scratch, and blood appeared on the young man's hands. Lee exclaimed that this time he would not back down and would definitely hold her. The girl's eyes continued to glow, but they were completely empty. At that moment, the cat jumped over the fence and shouted, "Now! Shout! The rabbit is entering the fight!" Memories flashed through the boy's mind, little frightened Beck sitting and wiping away her tears with her fist. He, also still a child, came to comfort his friend. Then the young man asked the little girl not to cry and promised to protect her. Returning to the present, the hero decided to follow the cat's advice and exclaimed, "The rabbit is going into battle." Lee Uju held his friend tightly in his arms, not allowing her to harm herself. A pillar of powerful and bright energy rose from the girl into the air. The next she went, suddenly, a large drop of energy separated from her head. It was a strange sight. What happened next completely stunned everyone present. Ears grew on the drop. It began. The young man heard the cat's voice. This means that the others have also arrived. Nina, the hero, something was happening around them. The air was literally filled with a mysterious and powerful energy. The young man eagerly awaited an explanation from his new friend. With his heart pounding, he looked at the night city, which was repeatedly pierced by pillars of light. Nina finally replied, "The signs of the Zodiac." The map resembled a fortune-telling card. On it, one could see the phases of the moon, constellations, inscriptions in Chinese, and yin-yang symbols. The sky began to lighten, and the sun was about to rise. The next moment, the girl opened her eyes, and from her gaze, it was clear that she did not understand where she was. The first person she saw was Lee. The young man asked if she was okay and if she had regained consciousness. Beck's eyes widened, and her face became frightened. A second later, she screamed, "What the hell are you doing here?" The beauty's face flushed with shame. The hero tried to explain that she was in his room. This news literally stunned Rabin. At that moment, she saw Nina. "You're that naked girl. Why are you wearing my clothes?" Suddenly, Beck heard a voice behind her. "You almost died, and you're already thinking about things." The girl looked back in fear and saw a rabbit's head just hanging in the air. The beauty laughed nervously and asked, "What's going on? This is all a dream, right?" Nina folded her arms across her chest and replied, "This is not a dream. You know better than anyone." A thought flashed through Beck's mind. Could it be true? I really feel connected to this rabbit. Now you're participating in the 12 animals competition, the cat decided to explain. Beck Rabin wanted an explanation. She couldn't even imagine what it was all about. Lee Uju exclaimed, "I also want an explanation of what the heck is going on here. What 12 animal competition are you talking about?" The rabbit's head approached the cat and said, "It's obvious. This cunning cat has presented everything in a favorable light for herself. Let me explain everything, honestly and briefly," added the strange creature. She explained that the competition between the 12 animals was a sacred game that determined the order of the 12 animals that protected the heavens. The one who is chosen as the judge and wears the magatama must find 12 spirits on Earth within 100 days who will become participants and return them to the game, said the rabbit's head. Lee asked why Raven had become possessed. Unlike when these competitions were first held, heaven and earth are now separated. In order for the divine spirit to reach the earth, a mediator is needed, explained the rabbit. The 12 spirits of the Zodiac, who have already become gods, cannot participate directly. Therefore, they inhabit humans and transfer their powers to them, added the strange stranger. The next moment, she decided to demonstrate how it all works and disappeared into the chest of the stunned Beck. Lee couldn't help himself and screamed, frightened by what he saw. Rabbi begged the rabbit to leave her body as soon as possible. During possession, as in our case, the mind of the host may be at risk. This is a side effect of having two souls in one body, added the deity. Lee Uju was suddenly struck by a stunning realization. At that moment, somewhere in the airport, a fragile girl was rolling her suitcase, pulling her cap over her eyes. The revealing clothes fit the stranger's figure tightly. She was another one in whom God had taken up residence. On the other side of town, a little boy asked his mother why a woman was wearing children's clothes. The girl looked confused. The t-shirt and shorts really were the wrong size. She walked over to the mirror but couldn't get used to her reflection. Somewhere on the street, a crowd of people lay on the ground, and a girl with a striped tail stood near them. At that moment, 11 other people besides Beck Rabin had become possessed. The tigress's eyes burned with a green magical fire. Beck received her own card with her image and the name Rabbit. "Does that mean 11 more people are now going through what Rabin went through?" exclaimed a shocked Lee. Nina folded her arms across her chest and confirmed the hero's guess. The young man clutched his head. "How can I persuade people I don't even know to join the tournament?" The rabbit said that they weren't complete strangers. The bearers, chosen by the deities of the Zodiac, are people who have at least the slightest connection to the court, added the deity. "That's probably why Rabin, who has a strong connection with you, was the first to be possessed," concluded the rabbit. The hero was surprised by this news. Could all these people really be connected to him in some way? The guy began to remember who else was around him besides Beck. Images of different people popped into his head. Lee fell onto the bed and grabbed his head in despair. What if the judge can't continue the tournament? For example, if he can't find participants within the allotted time, asked the hero. Nina said, "Divine spirits cannot return to the heavenly kingdom, so the carriers of their souls will be completely captured by the gods of the Zodiac." Beck Rabin asked the rabbit in horror if she would also lose her own body. He replied, "Since we are already separated, you will not be possessed, but we will have to live together forever." The girl was stunned by this news. Seeing her reaction, the rabbit said angrily, "I'm not eager for this either." Meanwhile, the hero stared at his hands in shock. He couldn't believe that the fates of 12 people now depended on him. Nina said, "That's right. That's why you must continue the tournament at all costs." The girl brought her face close to the young man's, took his hands in hers, and whispered softly, "Just stay close to me." At that moment, Beck Rabin began to whine. "Why is this happening to me?" Lee scratched the back of his head, unable to answer that question. "It's obvious that it was the cat who restarted the tournament," the rabbit managed to say before his mouth was covered by a hand. Nina whispered quietly, with a threat in her voice. "What the hell are you talking about?" replied the head. "Does the cat really think she can hide this fact?" Beck suddenly said, "So what are the rules of the tournament? Is the cat hiding that too?" Nina exclaimed indignantly that the rules were set by the judge, but Lee didn't even remember them. The next moment, the hero felt a strange thumping in his chest, unlike his heartbeat. It was as if something powerful wanted to break free. The cat saw the glow on Uju's chest and rushed forward. Grabbing the guy's shirt, she tore it apart with ease. What Nina saw stunned her. Something resembling a tattoo appeared on Lee's chest, shining brightly. In the center was a magical yin-yang symbol, surrounded by runes, a circle, and 12 lines representing the 12 signs of the Zodiac. Beck covered her face but peeked through her fingers. The girl wanted to know what it meant. The rabbit's head explained, "Look closely. Right now, only rabbit is written on the symbol at the top, right? If the judge manages to gather all the animals and fill in the blanks, Then he will learn the rules, added the rabbit. Lee tried to button his shirt. The young man came to the right conclusion. He needed to hurry up and find the bearers of the other zodiac signs. Rabbi looked somewhat confused. It seemed she still had questions. After gathering her thoughts, she asked Nina, "Why did you restart the tournament in the first place?" The cat looked at her from under her eyebrows. She didn't want to answer that question. The beauty lowered her eyes to the floor and remained silent. The rabbit's head interrupted the conversation. "Probably for the sake of a wish. The winner of the tournament can make one wish." The new information stunned the childhood friends, and they wanted an explanation. Nina decided to change the subject, hugged Beck, and said, "We'll think about it when the tournament starts." The cat quickly pushed the girl out the door, saying, "In the meantime, let's focus on finding the carriers. The meeting is over." Beck Rabin didn't argue. She sat down on the threshold and picked up her sneakers. But suddenly, the girl's eyes widened as an incredible thought occurred to her. "Nina, are you going to stay here?" the beauty asked angrily. The cat confirmed her guess with surprise. It was obvious to her. "Anywhere, a grown man and woman alone. It's outrageous," Beck added. The cat laughed cheerfully at the girl's reaction, realizing that she was jealous. Nina deliberately hugged Lee and exclaimed cheerfully, "Don't be afraid, I don't bite." Rabin was almost torn apart by anger, her face turning red. The girl disappeared into the hallway, exclaiming, "That's not what I mean." For a while, Lee and Nina heard Beck's footsteps on the stairs. The next moment, she returned, throwing a pile of her sports clothes at the cat and advising her to dress more appropriately. Then Rabin slammed the door loudly and went to her bedroom. Nina grumbled that it wasn't her style at all, but she honestly changed her clothes while Lee turned away shyly with a red face. "Wait, are you seriously planning to stay at my place?" the guy asked, confused. "What else can I do? I have nowhere else to go." "You have to take responsibility," Nina said. Suddenly, the hero felt the girl touch the edge of his shirt. Lee Uju looked back. Nina wanted to say something else. The young man's face was crimson, and he waited with bated breath for her to speak. But it turned out that the cat was just hungry. There was a frying pan on the stove, its contents resembling an omelet, but for some reason slightly blue in color. Opening the milk carton, the hero poured it into a bowl. His expression was still one of utter bewilderment. The young man still couldn't believe that all this was happening to him. He tried not to look at Nina, but his curiosity was stronger. What the hero saw literally stunned him. The cat knelt down in front of the bowl of milk, which was standing on the floor. The girl's face was full of pleasure as she began to lap up the milk like a real cat. The young man ate himself and watched Nina eat with interest. "She's a cat at heart, isn't she? She looks like a normal girl on the outside." The beauty finally finished eating and looked satisfied. She asked why the milk was so cold, and the hero replied that he had taken it out of the refrigerator. Lee was surprised by Nina's reaction to the word refrigerator. It seemed she had never heard of such a device. The guy asked if she had really never seen a refrigerator before. The cat replied that 3,000 years ago, they didn't have such things. "How did you manage all this time?" Lee Uju asked her new acquaintance in surprise. "I waited in a long sleep, and when I opened my eyes, the world had changed so much," Nina said sadly. When she came to, she wanted to eat fish, but she couldn't find the fish market in its old place. Now there was a store there. The beauty did not understand where everything had gone. How everything around her had changed so much. Suddenly, she smiled and said she needed to find a mill. The hero decided to say something to his uninvited guest. "Nothing like that exists anymore," said the young man, literally stunning Nina. It was difficult for her to understand that too much time had passed and the world had changed beyond recognition. Silence fell in the room, and it was a little awkward. Lee didn't know what else to say. Nina took a deep breath, gathering her strength to speak. "It feels like I've entered another world," the cat smiled. Uju was silent, surprised by the girl's behavior. The young man remembered seeing Nina with ice cream in her hands and asked how she had bought it. "Ice cream? You mean the cold stick? I just found a box that smelled like milk and took it," the cat explained. She had simply stolen the ice cream because she didn't know what to do. The girl fell silent, resting her chin on her hand and staring thoughtfully at the floor. Looking at his guest, the hero blushed again. The guy nervously fidgeted with his fingers, as if he was trying to decide something. "I'm going for a walk. Do you want to come with me?" Lee finally said. Nina was surprised by his offer and did not hesitate to answer. The young man decided that she did not want to go with him and said that in that case he would go alone. The girl was really very strange. She jumped to her feet and grabbed Lee's hands like a madwoman. The cat smiled. She really wanted to go for a walk because she thought it would be really fun. The full moon was shining brightly in the sky, which was a beautiful blue-purple color. The hero held Nina's hand as they strolled through the streets of the evening city. The cat, who had slept for 3,000 years, found everything interesting. She turned her head in different directions. The girl watched as moths flew toward the light. The next moment, a stray cat appeared from somewhere in the alleyway and hissed predatorily. Nina immediately fell to her knees and hissed back. A little later, they reached a vending machine, which literally caught the girl's attention. Nina froze near it, as if spellbound. Not knowing how to get a drink, she began pounding her fists on the glass. The next thing that surprised the cat was the streetlights. The hero was frightened when the girl casually sat down to drink her beverage on the edge of the roof. He stood nearby with his heart in his mouth as Nina enjoyed the view of the city at night. Lee managed to pull her off the roof only by promising to buy her some fish. The friends entered a 24-hour supermarket. Nina looked at the colorful packages with interest, while Uju rummaged through the refrigerator. After finding some delicious ice cream, the friends headed to the checkout. "That's how you should shop," said the hero, paying for the ice cream. He handed the girl a slice of watermelon and added, "Next time, don't steal anything." The young man touched the cat's face with the ice cream, and she squinted from the unfamiliar sensation. Nina glanced at the ice cream with her open eye and held her breath. But the next moment, she jumped up as if she had been bitten, which frightened Lee very much. The girl licked the ice cream off her cheek, clearly enjoying the taste. A second later, Nina exclaimed with delight, "This is delicious!" The cat grabbed the boy's hand, in which he was holding the ice cream, and began to eat it. Everything was strange to her in this new and incomprehensible world, but she liked the taste of this cold, milky treat. Up close, she looks like a normal girl, if you don't pay attention to her ears and tail, thought Lee Uju, looking at Nina's face. Suddenly, the hero heard someone entering the store. His friends barely had time to hide before a boy and a girl appeared inside, chatting cheerfully with each other. "Did you know that self-service stores like this one are now popular as dating spots for Zoomers and millennials?" The young man asked with a smile. "And if there's no one here but us, maybe we should kiss," the young man suggested to his companion. The girl didn't mind. Nina continued to enjoy her ice cream and paid no attention to the conversation, but Lee did. The next moment, the cat felt a cap being placed on her head, hiding her ears. Then, grabbing Nina, who didn't understand what was going on, Uju pulled her toward the exit. The lovers looked confused, because they couldn't imagine that their kiss would be witnessed. Only when he reached his room did the hero catch his breath. Leaning against the door, he closed his eyes and took a deep breath. The young man suggested ending their walk for the day. Now, Nina wanted to know why they had left the store so quickly. The girl regretted that they had run all the way home. Now she was all wet with sweat. The hero apologized and advised her to take a shower. Imagine his surprise when the beauty, like a real cat, began to lick herself. It was too much for one day. Nina began her strange ritual with her hand. First, she licked her palm, then moved on to her forearm. The hero grabbed his head and shouted, "What are you doing?" The next moment, he pushed the resisting cat into the shower and advised her to wash herself thoroughly with water. "Water? No way! My fur will get wet." "Cats wash themselves perfectly well," Nina defended herself. Lai wanted to know what fur she was talking about. He calmly pointed to the shower and explained how to use it. The shameless cat, without waiting for the young man to leave, began to undress. The hero flew out of the bathroom like a bullet. A strange feeling came over him. He closed the door behind him and paused for a moment. What a strange day it had been. A drop of sweat rolled down Uju's face. He tried to decide what to do next with his guest. The young man returned, about to grab the handle again to warn the girl that the door wouldn't close. Through the crack, he saw a sight that excited him even more. The fragile beauty stood in the steam, her wet hair framing her face beautifully. The hero froze in place, all thoughts leaving his unfortunate head. On the balcony of the house where the guy lived, two cats were chatting. At that moment, Nina finally came out of the shower. She said that the water was warm and it was pleasant. The beauty dried her wet hair with a towel. Her slender body was covered by the hero's t-shirt. The girl saw that Lee was looking at something in the refrigerator. She said, "Uju, do you really love this thing you call a refrigerator so much?" A thought flashed through the young man's mind. "And you are to blame for this." Alone with his thoughts in the bathroom, the hero forced himself to control his emotions. He had a regular 3,000-year-old cat visiting him. The young man looked closely at his reflection in the mirror. After calming down a little, he finally left the bathroom. Looking into his bedroom, Lee became angry. His bed was occupied. Nina was sleeping sweetly, taking up the entire bed. The hero looked at this sight in confusion. He said, "Should I turn off the light?" The cat opened her eyes. She sat up on the bed and asked what Uju was doing. The young man replied, "What do you mean? What am I doing? I'm going to sleep and I think the floor will be comfortable." The beauty advised the guy not to do that. She clearly didn't mind him lying down next to her. "Let's sleep next to each other, like last night," Nina suggested in a seductive tone. For some reason, the hero was angered by this suggestion. He shouted, "What do you mean by together?" He continued to grumble angrily, at which point Nina took the form of a black cat and jumped on him. Lee said with admiration, "That's much better, so we can sleep in the same bed." When the guy closed his eyes, the image of a naked beauty immediately appeared in his imagination. The young man scolded himself for such thoughts, but he couldn't help it. Meanwhile, as she fell asleep, Nina thought that the man had very warm hands. The rays of the full moon penetrated the room through the open window. Covering the cat with a blanket, Lee repeated to himself once again that it was just an animal sleeping next to him. He looked closely at the small figure covered in shiny black fur. Uju closed his eyes, hoping to calm his imagination. The staircase was empty, the house was asleep, but the first rays of the morning sun appeared on the walls through the window. The hero began to wake up, and the first thing he saw when he opened his eyes were lips. Sleep left Lee in a matter of seconds, his eyes fixed on the girl's bare chest. The next moment, the street was awakened by the wild cry of a guy as he realized the situation. The young man jumped to his feet, waking up a confused Nina. She rubbed her eyes and asked why he was already up. Lee calmed his emotions and told the girl that it was time for him to go to school. She wrapped herself in a blanket and asked with a smile, "School? Is it like a classroom?" The young man answered her question in the affirmative. Nina immediately exclaimed that she wanted to go too. His guest statement did not make the hero very happy. He did not want to become even more of a laughingstock at school. The hero immediately imagined how, once in the school hallway, the cat would start rehearsing and attracting unwanted attention. The boy froze in place with a toothbrush in his mouth, his face looking frightened. At that moment, he refused Nina's request. Meanwhile, an irritated Beck Rabin was waiting for the young man on the first floor of the house. The girl was curious as to why her friend was so late. When Lee finally appeared, he looked guilty. Seeing her friend, the girl smiled and waved at him. But the next moment, the beauty's mood changed because Nina came out onto the street behind her friend. Rabin pursed her lips, her suspicions confirmed. The girl was upset. She noticed that her childhood friend's face was red with shame. Could something have happened between the two of them last night? Meanwhile, the cat said to the guy, "Since you insisted so much, I won't go to school with you. So, Uchu, you have to do everything yourself, understand? If someone seems even slightly suspicious to you, you have to check them out. Find the 12 signs of the Zodiac and make them compete, okay?" Were Nina's last words of advice. The hero replied that he understood everything and asked Nina to stay home. "Don't go anywhere, don't cause trouble like last time. Your tail attracts too much attention." The cat remained silent, watching her chosen one leave, with no intention of obeying him. Nina smiled slyly, having her own plan. The next moment, she turned into a black cat and headed down the stairs. It was still very early, so the streets were empty. On his way to school, Lee was lost in thought. Seriously, how am I supposed to find the other signs of the Zodiac? The hero remembered the first time he saw the possessed Beck Rabin. She looked different, but no other people in a similar state had appeared on his path yet. Continuing to think, the young man reached the door of his classroom without noticing. Lee came to the conclusion that first and foremost, he should worry about how to get through today. Without waiting for an answer, the boy quietly opened the door and peeked through the crack. The young man froze in surprise. The classroom was empty. He heard a conversation in the hallway. "Why are there so many empty seats today?" "I don't know, but none of those who constantly bully us showed up today, and that's great news." Lee walked to his seat and heard the teacher's voice asking everyone to sit down. "Many students are absent today. I have received information that they have all been hospitalized," the teacher said to those present. Whispers could be heard among the children. How did they end up in the hospital? Maybe there was an accident or a gang fight. The woman banged her hand on the table, ordering everyone to be quiet. She explained that she was still assessing the situation. When she received reliable information, she would share it with the audience. The teacher advised the children not to spread rumors or cause chaos. The next moment, she turned to the class president and the lesson began. Classes continued, so the schoolyard was empty. Lee Uju was pleased with the silence in the classroom today. How wonderful it was when no one was bullying him. The hero thought that this is how it should be every day in a normal school. Suddenly, the The young man remembered that he needed to return the books to the library immediately. Jumping up from his desk, the boy grabbed his books and ran to the other wing of the school. He made it in time, and as he was returning the textbooks, he thought, if it were like this every day, I would love going to school. Lost in his thoughts, Lee flinched when he felt someone touch his hands. Looking up, his gaze met the confused dark eyes looking at him through glasses. The two looked alike. Uju was the first to recover and apologized. The librarian hastened to assure him that it was her fault. The girl had dark hair and large, intelligent eyes. She was very pretty. The librarian looked down at the books the hero was returning. The first one was a tome about rabbits. The young man saw her gaze, blushed, and explained that he liked animals. The girl replied that she already knew that. It was a strange and mysterious answer. Maybe she was a stalker. The next moment, the librarian laughed and explained, I know this because you are always near the biology books in the natural sciences section. Lee could not have expected such attention to his person, and he did not know how to respond. The thought flashed through his mind. If only I had known, I would have read more impressive books. The beauty silently looked at the confused guy. The pause dragged on. The blush did not fade from the guy's face. He was so nervous that he even broke out in a sweat. A line formed behind Lee. The librarian said, if you've returned everything, you can go. At that moment, Uju rushed out of the library. As he ran away, he shouted, Goodbye! The beautiful girl watched him go, a strange emotion appearing in her eyes. Once in the hallway, the hero, red as a tomato, thought about how ashamed he was of his behavior. Looking back as if he were being chased, he didn't notice the obstacle in front of him and bumped his forehead right into Beck Rabin. The childhood friends clutched their heads, both in great pain. Uju, why don't you watch where you're going? The girl exclaimed, annoyed and offended. The hero apologized, but did not intend to explain anything. The beauty asked if he had found any suspicious people. Lee did not have good news. Beck looked questioningly at her friend, as if trying to read his thoughts. The girl touched the guy's elbow and said he was hopeless. The young man felt something strange again, as if he had been electrocuted. Rabin said over her shoulder that she needed to check if he was doing his job properly. The girl pulled the confused guy along with her and did not answer his questions about what was going on. Since divine spirits descend upon people, we must first check the places where there are crowds, Beck finally explained. The hero agreed with the girl. It was indeed a very smart move. The beauty said slyly, I've known you since childhood. You're the one who doesn't think things through. That's why you'll need my help. The young man reminded his friend how she fell and cried at a sports day celebration in elementary school. Rabin exclaimed angrily, When did I ever do that? Stop remembering such nonsense. Continuing to walk around the stadium, the two continued to argue. Suddenly, Beck exclaimed that she had forgotten something. Lee wanted to know what it was. The girl said, I completely forgot the rabbit's phrase. The Zodiacs are hiding among those connected to you at this school. They both immediately thought of the bullies who hadn't shown up at school today. The hero felt something in his chest again, in the place where the mysterious symbol had appeared. The beauty noticed that her friend was feeling unwell and rushed to support him. But the young man put his hand out, stopping the girl and said, I'm fine, it's just better to go home. Beck froze in confusion, not understanding the sudden change in the boy's behavior. She heard the voices of the boys behind her and decided to check if one of them was hiding the Zodiac deity. Rabbi followed them. Hiding behind the corner of the building, she eavesdropped on their conversation. Who knows what happened to Sejin and his gang? Was it really a bicycle accident? The beauty heard. Rumor has it that they were beaten so badly that they ended up in the hospital, the girl heard. Suddenly, one of the people whose conversation she had been eavesdropping on flew past Beck. The confused student froze in place, and in the next moment she noticed the librarian, whose eyes glowed with a magical fire. Meanwhile, the hero decided to go to the infirmary, as the pain in his chest was bothering him greatly. Lying on the couch, Lee Uju called the nurse. He wanted to know if he could leave the infirmary and return to class. The next second, the young man saw a beautiful woman with a huge bust standing over him, who forbade him to leave. The nurse was wearing high heels. She threw off her robe, and it fell smoothly to the floor. The woman leaned over the confused guy. Her lips were seductively parted, revealing a pink tongue between them. She leaned over and reached out her hands to her hero. Something very strange was happening in the hospital ward. The nurse was openly seducing the student, and he stood frozen in place, unable to even move. The woman licked her lips and said seductively to the guy that his treatment was not yet complete. The woman brought her face close to the young man's, and he could feel her hot breath on his skin. She began to shamelessly unbutton her black blouse. The crazy nurse kept repeating, Your treatment isn't over yet. Lee finally managed to scream. He was very frightened by the strange behavior of the adult woman. Just a minute ago, the hero, left alone with his thoughts, was walking down an empty corridor. Suddenly, everything spun before the guy's eyes. The thought flashed through his mind. What's happening to me? Why did my chest suddenly feel so tight? Lee grabbed the wall to keep from falling. He needed to get help immediately. When the young man entered the medical office, the nurse was doing something with her stockings. The hero closed his eyes and turned away, apologizing to the woman for not knocking. The nurse replied that there was no need to apologize. She just had something poking her in her stockings. The young man's heart began to beat even faster, and he found it difficult to breathe. He closed his eyes and thought that this feeling was different from his usual heartbeat. Suddenly, the woman touched his neck and asked, "You're Uju from 3rd grade, right?" It was as if she could read his mind, because she knew that the boy had come to the medical center because of chest pain. The hero clenched his teeth, and for a moment he thought he was about to lose consciousness. He agreed with the nurse and said that he had suddenly felt a sharp pain in his chest. The woman hugged the boy and touched the very spot where he felt pressure. "A burning sensation near the solar plexus. Did I guess your symptoms correctly?" the strange nurse asked in a seductive tone. The next moment, she finally let go of the hero and, turning away, asked if he wanted to be the first. "I was so surprised by this strange examination. It's as if she can read my mind," flashed through the guy's mind as he was about to sit down on a chair. But suddenly, he heard that he should sit down somewhere else. This completely confused the bewildered student. The woman pointed to a couch covered with a white sheet. The nurse's narrowed eyes and seductive smile spoke louder than 1,000 words. Meanwhile, the hero's eyes, which looked even bigger behind his glasses, nearly popped out of his head at such a suggestion. The silent scene between the two dragged on, but Uju did not have the strength to resist this woman. He moved closer and sank heavily onto the bed. The young man tried not to look at the temptress, but she paid no attention to that. "Take it off! Your shirt! Take it off quickly!" demanded the shameless nurse. She saw that the young man had frozen and offered to help him undress. The hero finally came to his senses and began to unbutton his shirt himself. The woman pointed to the young man's chest and asked if it hurt there. "Actually, I used a resonance spell," the mysterious stranger suddenly confessed. "You feel dizzy because I haven't fully mastered my powers yet," the nurse explained. Climbing onto the bed, she added that this incredible method doesn't work for long. Lee was very scared and couldn't understand anything this strange woman was saying. She did not answer, but moved closer and covered his mouth with a kiss. The hero's face flushed, and he begged the nurse to wait. But she had no intention of stopping, whispering in his ear that he was incredibly lucky. The next moment, the strange woman's legs turned into a powerful tail covered with green scales. Her eyes now resembled those of a snake. Lee had managed to find another Zodiac. The hero was stunned by this discovery. Now he began to understand why his chest had been hurting. The ancient god in the nurse's body had found the judge of the competition. The young man barely managed to turn his head away, thus saving his own life from a crushing blow from the monster's sharp tail. Lee cautiously decided to open his eyes to understand what he had managed to escape from.